Castel Sant'Angelo is, like many other buildings in Rome, a structure that through the centuries has seen several different purposes and uses, evolving with time. Unlike many other of these ancient buildings dating to the ancient Roman times, however, it possesses some particular feature, consisting in the fact that it is situated on the left side of the river Tiber. If you were to look at a map, in fact, you would notice quite quickly how the ancient city was built and developed on the right shore. The Pantheon, Colosseum, Imperial Forums, Circus Maximus, and many other structures are all on the right side of the river, which caused them to be abandoned during the Middle Ages. This was not to be the case, however, for Castel Sant'Angelo. The reason is quite simple. The left side of the river was mostly uninhabited. Instead, the Romans had here a small necropolis, and on the Vatican Hill, a circus, sadly renowned to be the place in which Christian persecution was carried out. It is precisely there, on top of the Vatican Hill, that St. Peter was crucified, and following his death, where Christians would start to gather, bringing to the erection and development of St. Peter's Basilica. It was Roman custom to bury their dead quite often on the roads leading to the city. It is quite apparent, for example, if, even nowadays, you take a walk on the Via Appia, on the southern side of the city. Tombstones and graves dot the landscape. The western side of the city was no exception. Whereas the urban development kept Via Appia most intact, the same is not true for Via Triumphalis, the triumphal way, which connected Rome to the Etruscan city of Veio. It's not possible to witness now, but if you were to walk in this road back in the day, you would have seen the same identical tombs and graveyards. It is perhaps due to this custom and reason that, initially, what is now Castel Sant'Angelo was started by Emperor Hadrian as a mausoleum, in which to bury himself right after death, mimicking the smaller mausoleum of Augustus, placed on the other side of the river. Towards the end of the Roman Empire, the city of Rome started to suffer a staggering depopulation. Whereas in the Principate of Augustus the city counted 1.5 million inhabitants, by year 500 AD this figure had dropped to 100,000, which would have then continued to constantly decrease up until year 1000, in which the total population consisted in a whopping 15,000 inhabitants, consisting in a reduction of 99%. To give some context, this would be the equivalent as, for example, New York, consisting of 9 million inhabitants, losing as far as 8,900,000 people in the span of just a couple centuries. Just imagine this in a modern city. Such huge change marked deeply the future development and crumbling of Rome. A big part of the infrastructure put in place during the early centuries fell in ruin, with a staggering number of empty buildings with no purpose anymore, instead, now, left to bandits and rot. Together with this, the political and social center of the city changed, shifting with the turn of the Middle Ages to the left side of the river, since it was there that the Pope sat, and the Basilica of St. Peter was built. Homes and buildings were now built where before, for the most part, there were just roads, farms and open campaign, causing the construction and rise of the neighborhood of Trastevere. So, in the Middle Ages, until modern times, the western shore developed, while instead the eastern shore was left mostly in ruins, often flooded by mud when the river overflowed, burying much of the ancient city's glory. Suffice to think that up until a couple centuries ago, the Roman Forum was used by sheep herders as open campaign, and a place where to bring their animals to eat. The proof of this ancient past and stratification of the city can be found also, for example, digging down. Do it on the right side and you will find the remains of one city. Do it on the left side and you will find the remains of farms. One example is the Church of Santa Cecilia. By all means and purposes you are in the heart of Trastevere, in the middle of the neighborhood where most people would have lived during the Middle Ages. If you ask and go down in the lower level of the church, however, you could be surprised to see that where the street used to be 2,000 years ago, there are actually the remains of a small farm instead of buildings. It becomes therefore mostly clear why Castel Sant'Angelo is such a unique structure in the Roman landscape. Whereas the buildings on the east were mostly abandoned, there would certainly be a use for such a gigantic, gargantuan structure such as this, so close to the Vatican. The first to understand the alternative potential of the structure was Emperor Honorius. Already in the 5th century AD, he realized the building could have been effectively converted into a fortress, including it into a section of the Aurelian walls, delimiting the perimeter of the ancient city. It is already at this point, a mere 2 centuries after its construction, that the mausoleum of Hadrian came to be known as a castle, seeing some action defending the city during the siege of Vandals and Visigoths. The religious significance came later, when during a plague in the 6th century, Pope Gregory had a vision. He saw the Archangel Michael on top of the structure, sheathing his sword and announcing the end of the plague, thing that indeed happened just after some days. The Pope, being thankful, had a statue of the Archangel being erected on the top of the mausoleum, a feature which then gave the name to the castle and is still present nowadays. What you see today, therefore, when approaching the structure, is a combination of ancient and new, and sometimes it is hard to understand which is which. The bridge, which might seem much more recent, actually has its main structure dating back almost 2000 years and was built together with the mausoleum, which is now the castle. The lower part of the structure is old, the higher part instead much newer, being mostly built in the Renaissance. Once you cross the bridge, look left and you see the beautiful, large street called Via della Conciliazione, which leads to St. Peter's Basilica. You could be justified to think that this was always the case, but in reality, this road is extremely recent and was built by the fascist government in 1929. If you were to visit the castle as little as 100 years ago, you would have seen just the dome of St. Peter, while the basilica shrouded by an entire neighborhood, now destroyed. Entering the building now through the inner courtyard is an experience in its own right, where it's possible to appreciate how all the different centuries contributed to the development of the structure. The walls are from the 17th century, the statues and busts ancient. Look down and the castle dates back 2000 years. Look up instead, and you see things built just in the past 500. Already from here, you can appreciate how the lower part is ancient and then ascends into more modern. Enter the building and you are in the mausoleum. The marble from ancient Rome brings you back 2000 years. You must make your way up by walking in order to reach the rooms where initially the emperors and their wives were buried, and to go forward in time. Once you have made your way towards the higher levels, however, and you reach the light, you are ahead 1000 years, and suddenly you are in what could be really considered a small Italian city from the Renaissance. The apartments that you see here were developed and expanded through time by different popes. The first one to imagine such a use for the fortress was Pope Niccolo V in the 14th century. Up until then, the main residence of the popes was situated on the Basilica of San Giovanni in Laterano. Different sections and rooms were built for different purposes. Besides the inner apartments and the most beautiful room called Apollo's Room, there are also other 2 inner courtyards, mainly used by soldiers and army as barracks, but also as a representative area for when guests arrived, and even luxury prisons for the nobility. The circular nature of the building allows you to walk all the way around, making most of the view. It is from this perspective, perhaps, that the military importance of the castle is the most apparent. What you see here is what Italians call il passetto. This is a bridge directly connected to St. Peter's Basilica and the Pope's apartments. It was built in the 13th century, and its main purpose was to provide a quick way for the Pope to escape in case of need. It was here that in the 16th century, Pope Clement VII managed to save his life from the German Protestant mercenaries, called Landsknechts, who were sacked in the city. It was used only 2 times in history, the other one being from Pope Borgia, Alexander VI. in order to free the army of the French King Charles VIII just a couple of years before. Going up to the highest level, the roof, you can finally see up close the statue of the Archangel Michael. Together with the statue, you can also take in the view, in what is perhaps one of the best vantage points over the entire city. The area immediately around is quite interesting. You can see here the white building in the back. That's the Palace of Justice, where the Supreme Court of Cassation, the most important court of appeal in Italy, is situated. The brown building instead is another one which was built by the fascist government about 100 years ago. It's the main seat for the association helping soldiers remain invalid during wars and their families. Looking at the southern, eastern side instead, it's possible to see the rooftops of some of the most famous and important buildings in the city. That's the Pantheon and the Altar of the Fatherland. Right behind the dome of the Pantheon, it's even possible to see the statues of the Basilica of San Giovanni, where the main papal residence used to be before Castel Sant'Angelo. On the far back instead, the silhouette of the Alban Hills and the ancient volcano which dominated the region, and on which slopes the ancient Latins used to live before the rise of Rome. Looking west, you are finally presented with a very beautiful view of the Vatican, St. Peter's Basilica and Via della Conciliazione.